Hi everyone, my name is Jessica and I'd just like to say welcome to the webinar. Thank you very much for registering. A few instructions to keep in mind before John begins his presentation. First of all, please note you'll all be on mute. If you've got a question, use the raise your hand tool or you can type your question in the chat box. I'll also type these instructions into the chat box just so you can view them as well. If you need any help at all, please just let me know. That includes any audio issues. You can also use the phone call option on the audio tab that you'll find on the side panel if that's the case. Thanks, John. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our presentation, Trends in Web Development. This topic is obviously very large and ever-changing, and it's difficult to get content which is relevant to everybody. So we've kind of just made a random selection. Hopefully it works. Please ask questions at any time. That will make it more interesting for all of us. As you know, digital is transforming our society. It's transforming the way people meet. It's transforming the way people get around and the way they stay, travel. There are some things that go wrong. So this is an image from the flooding in Queensland a few years ago, and that actually caused a lot of disruption to a lot of the digital assets that companies, organisations across Australia had. The first thing I want to talk about is the rise of DevOps. So DevOps is the profession that is coming out to manage risks associated with digital assets. If you haven't heard about it, I've got a little bit of an introduction. It's really the software engineering practices that are related to kind of running software for long periods of time. If you're a small not-for-profit organisation, you probably haven't come across this yet, but it will come into your sort of world and the assets that you have, the websites or tools you're communicating with your clients. When it comes to supporting a piece of software for the long term, there's a natural conflict between the people that want to keep it running as is today and not falling over versus the people who want to push new functionality and develop new things. The people pushing for new functionality want speed and flexibility, and the people who are trying to keep it alive want it to be stable, which is the complete opposite. There are really quite well-developed processes for dealing with this, which basically come down to costing a lot more money in terms of your hosting infrastructure and also the people and services you have to maintain your digital assets. If you haven't heard of this before, it's coming to your organization maybe in a year or two, but best practice these days is usually a minimum 4-tier infrastructure setup. This is where you have your development server connected to your live server, which is also known as your production server, via staging servers and quality assurance servers. This infrastructure ensures that your live digital assets are not affected by developing new functionality, new content, and you can kind of have a staged approach to pushing out new assets. There's also trends in software engineering where you put a lot of testing, automated testing at the staging server level. This is really vital for long-term support of any digital asset because it means that once the tests have been written, when you deploy a new piece of functionality, you know that the entire rest of your site is going to work well. Why should you care? Basically, it's about risk mitigation. It's about having trusted delivery and the ability to have small projects work in conjunction with your content team, updating content and things like that. We've prepared a little do's and don'ts slide. These will be shared with you afterwards. I don't want to spend too much time on them, but just some highlights. Obviously, in this day and age, you want all of your customer-facing assets in the cloud. You want to make sure your developers are using code repositories. And don't forget the value of assets under construction. If you spend 6 months building something new and your developer loses it, that's a real problem. And oftentimes people don't apply the same level of robustness to the infrastructure for assets in development as they do to live assets. All right, the next topic I want to talk about is pirates. Everybody's afraid of people from foreign countries logging in or stealing your assets. What happens if you forget to renew your domain name? So that happened last year for Australia's Prime Minister. He forgot to renew his domain name, and therefore somebody else was legally entitled to renew that. It also means that that new owner of the domain name is able to create email addresses which are exactly the same as what Scott Morrison used previously, and then they can really kind of commit a lot of fraud, acting as though they are your organization. In the last year, we've probably seen 3 or 4 national organizations lose control of some digital assets because the domain level control was lost. So we have some do's and don'ts. Make sure you register all your domain names in one account, one corporate account for your organization. Be careful about individuals registering domain names for new projects or conferences or whatever. Don't forget about the fact that some people go on long service leave or resign, and what happens to the renewal reminders at that period of time, because if you don't renew the domain names, you will lose control of it. Next year, direct registration is coming out. So if your organization has a domain name like nds.org.au, next year you'll be able to register the name nds.au. This is a competitive process, and you have existing owners of domain names able to register first, but if you don't do it in the time period allotted, that domain name is open to the market. So make sure you have a good understanding of what domain names you want to own, because this is coming next year and it will happen pretty quickly. I'd like to talk about integration, and most digital assets these days are working between different digital platforms. So you might have your website and it might talk to your database your customer database in Salesforce. It's quite common in the not-for-profit space where you might, for example, have users go to your website and they enter a username and password, and it's authenticating that user versus against your Salesforce database. Maybe you're showing content just for that user, maybe pricing levels or information or booking processes, and then maybe you're wanting activities to be pushed back to your CRM. So we see these as really the big wave, and that's what's happening now with all projects, and it's only going to get more and more complex. So we've got some examples of some failures that people need to think about. And I want to stress that this is really the way forward. There isn't really an opportunity for an all-in-one that works for most organizations. Usually you're combining best practice for different things. And if you've got an integration between 2 pieces of software, if any one thing falls over in that integration, then it's not going to work. These are some of the common platforms that we encounter, and all of these have had incidences of them going down. You might have heard Virgin Australia had a loss of profit when they were not able to book through their website. Their booking engine was supplied by a division of Accenture, and that became unavailable, and that had a really big impact on their bottom line. People often use payment gateways, and in the not-for-profit sector as a general rule, a lot of people are doing donations or different things like that. Payment gateways do go down. If you're using a lot of, if your organization generates significant revenue through that method, you might want to think about having some redundancy in that regard. You also might want to think about what sort of backup your organization has. So in the IT world, the trend towards having robust service level agreements 24/7 or whatever your customer hours are, that's really quite established. We're seeing that move into MarTech or marketing technologies, and also increasingly nowadays HR technologies. And therefore organizations need to kind of think about what are their critical digital assets. If your clients book your services through your website on their mobile phone, then you want to make sure that that's going to work on the weekends or after hours when they're on the couch or however it is. I thought I'd stop at this point and just see if we've got any questions so far. Jessica?
Not yet, John. So just letting you know, yeah, not yet.
No worries. Well, if anyone would like to send in a question via chat, please feel free to do so. General Data Protection Regulations, GDPR, is already impacting Australia. There's 30,000 new EU migrants to Australia every year. There's a lot of people who are already citizens of the EU, and there's a lot of people who've got ancestral right, which gives them guaranteed citizenship. This means that if any of those people interact with any of your systems, whether it's in Australia or anywhere in the world, that you are already caught into the GDPR regulations. They are very onerous and they're quite vague. British Airways recently got fined $230 million for a data breach. Basically, they got hacked. So it wasn't their fault they got hacked, but from the opinion of the regulator, they said it basically exposed poor security arrangements. And the rule is that companies must maintain adequate security. So this is a pretty vague definition. The reason why I want to highlight it in particular today is that the ACCC recently, and this is only a couple of months ago, they're calling for Australia to have its own equivalent GDPR regulation. And there's quite a few facets to this which impact organisations across Australia. The first is obviously they'll need to reconsider their legal terms and conditions and their internal processes, the way they deal with information. A lot of digital platforms will have to be rebuilt from scratch. There's some facets to GDPR which, if they are replicated in Australia, may make a lot of digital systems completely not compliant. The penalty regime in Europe means that you can be fined up to 4% of your organisation, your worldwide revenue. And also there's a massive impact to your reputation if something bad happens, particularly if your organisation requires private details about individuals in order to be able to book your services. People will not have trust in you. The media will enjoy running stories about it. So there's all the reputational risk side of things as well. These sort of regulations are coming, and people should be aware that just outsourcing for third-party penetration testing isn't sufficient. Because this is a NDS webinar, I'm assuming most organisations have got a good handle on website accessibility, but I thought I'll just run through it for those organisations that haven't. Inclusive design is all about making your services and organisation accessible by a full spectrum of humans, and there's on this planet a very wide divergence of people. So it's really about trying to make your assets better for everybody, and it just so happens to help people with particular disabilities such as vision impairments. What I want to highlight is that there's a principle in accessibility that while people often immediately think about permanently disabled people, there's other forms as well. So for example, someone with a broken arm is only able to interact in the same way as someone without an arm, and someone who's got it holding a baby is similarly impaired. In this way, if you design a service that works really well for someone with a permanent situation, you're going to make your assets better for all of these, and this encapsulates a huge proportion of the population. Just as an example, the guidelines for accessibility for websites is called WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's a new version, 2.1, came out last year, and one of the criteria is putting text on video. So if you've got a webinar presentation, getting some transcriptions so people can read what's being said. Now that works well for a deaf person, but it also works well for a mother holding a baby that's sleeping, and they want to consume the content, but they don't want the audio noise. For us, for example, we did some work for an organisation that works with basically people with anorexia, and they found a huge proportion of users were actually on their mobile phone reading the content under the cover of their bed because they were, wanting to access information about the situations, but due to embarrassment or whatever, they want to do it in the most private place possible. So optimizing content for that really does benefit the community. I've kind of glossed over some of these items before. Why should you care about it? It's the right thing. Firstly, you are legally required to in many instances. I think also from a leadership in the community perspective, it works for people in NDS to actually lead in this area. Then we get into, it does actually create better products. A lot of people have a permanent disability. Then we have the other two categories that we mentioned of temporary or situational. If you're looking for ideas about how to interact with accessibility, Apple has done a really great job. Microsoft has also done some very good things. You may have heard Commonwealth Bank got sued over their EFTPOS terminal that was not accessible. Basically, if you were vision impaired, you couldn't actually see where the numbers were. There was no tactility to it, so you couldn't feel it. They reached a confidential settlement recently, and Coles a few years ago had a website where screen readers for people who are vision impaired, it worked well. They could order online. Coles released a new website which did not have that accessibility aspect to the e-commerce experience, and Coles was sued because of it, and they did have a payout as well as significant reputational damage. Probably the simplest aspect there is to ensure you include talking to people with disabilities, in particular any categories of people who might be impacted or engaged directly with your organisation, and that can work quite well. Okay, now I thought we'd change tact a little bit, and we talk about some examples of digital disruption. Just before we do, Jessica, have we had any questions?
Yes, we do, John. Do you recommend that Australian organisations abide by GDPR to be safe?
Yes, we would. We would at least suggest you put it on your radar. So, for example, if you have a legal firm on retainer, you might get them to check in on what sort of policies and procedures you might like to reconsider to be compliant. You might like to get your tech people to look into what aspects could be a problem. What I would do at this phase, obviously subject to budget. If you're a small organisation that doesn't have oodles of money to put to it, I would start getting ready for it. So start to understand the boundaries of GDPR compliance. If you have any European customers, you obviously need to probably elevate the priority of working through those issues. But otherwise, I would probably at this stage start getting ready for it. And then the minute Australia issues some draft regulations, I would probably look towards a roadmap of becoming compliant with whatever they are. Obviously, the Australian regulations will have a period of time while they're created and then shared and iterated before they become legislated. And then when they do, there'll probably be some sort of a period of time when it becomes, you become penalised to it. But if you get ready for GDPR now, you'll probably be pretty well positioned for the Australian regulations. You might just have to tweak a few things. That's what I would recommend. I hope that's answered your question. I'm not able to see any feedback at the moment.
Thank you so much, John. Would you be able to answer one more question, if that's all right? We just had another one come through. So we have Antonio, and he's just asked, may I check when is the .au, when does that become available? Like when are registrations open for that? When can you register?
So it was actually supposed to be happening now, and there is quite a strict timeline that was issued earlier this year. The regulatory agency is called AUDA, A-U-D-A, and about a month ago they had pushed it back. So I think at this stage it looks like about 1st of January, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they push it back again. But what I can do, Jessica, is I can find out those dates as they currently are, and I'll share them after this presentation, if that's all right.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And just to confirm,
if I could just add to it, so that if you have domain names, you will have a period of time where you should go and where you basically nominate that you want to get the .au. If nobody else contests that, then you will be able to register that. If multiple people contest it, so for example, we're butterfly.com.au, if the people that own butterfly.net.au go for it as well, it's unfortunately a poorly thought through process where we have to fight each other out for it and then come and tell the regulator who's going to get it. Otherwise, nobody gets it and it becomes available in the open market.
And just to confirm, so it's actually going to reach a point where the .com won't actually be coming before the .au. Is that correct as well?
So the current plan is that .com.au will still exist. They're introducing .au as an additional domain space. The unfortunate reality is it means that most organisations will now buy additional domain names because you want to keep your current domain names and you want to buy the .au instead. There were some proposals that Australia simply moves .com.au to be .au, but the reality is that the outer board is predominantly controlled by the organisations that make money selling domain names. So the method that was chosen will pretty much guarantee most organisations will increase the number of domain names they now pay annual registration for or registration for.
Okay, thank you, John.
Okay, I might move on to digital disruption then, just checking for time. I've got about 10 minutes left. Okay, so I've got a couple of good examples or what I'd like to consider good examples. And most organisations that I talk to haven't come across these. So I'm going to go through them a little bit. Belong Mobile. This is the point of my presentation where I'd like to see a show of hands about who's heard of it, but unfortunately that won't work in a webinar. So everyone knows Qantas has got Jetstar as their low-cost brand. Belong is Telstra's low-cost brand. The way that they have unbundled their service is that you do all of your interaction with Belong via the website. Now, what's good about this is that you can pick up the SIM cards at any Coles or Woolworths, JB Hi-Fi. They're kind of around all over Australia. Your mobile phone will still be powered by Belong, on the Telstra network. So you get very good coverage all across Australia. You don't get access to the new 5G towers, but that may come in future. And they do say that you're going through the Telstra network as opposed to the core. So my experience is it seems to be very, very close to regular Telstra mobile phone towers, but Telstra does say theirs is better. What I like about it is if you are able to use a computer, you can do everything online. You can go online, you can connect your mobile phone number to the SIM card, you can play with your account, you can top it up, and it basically means you don't have to go into a store. And I personally hate going into a retail store, joining a queue, waiting for a long period of time. So I find this to be a very good service. If you go online, there's really skewed feedback. People either give it 5 out of 5 in terms of stars, they love it, or they hate it. And the people that hate it don't seem to understand the experience. So there's no phone number you can call for help. You have to fix it yourself online. There is a chat service you can send in inquiries, but really what's so interesting about this is it's a lot cheaper for Telstra to operate. They don't have retail stores, they don't have to pay for any customer interaction, it's all online. It's also interesting because Telstra is effectively disrupting itself. You're getting access to the Telstra network, but significantly cheaper, which is exactly what Jetstar, Qantas did with Jetstar. They replaced some Qantas holiday destination trips with Jetstar planes and actually, stopped doing Qantas in those markets. So my suggestion to you is if you can think of maybe popping up a front end where it's a digital only interaction experience, maybe it's a booking process or something. if you don't do it in your space, somebody else may do it, and then they will capture the clients. Stitch Fix is another example. So this is a retail or fashion example. Retail fashion is dying in Australia. It's going through a real problem time. There's a lot of people in Australia who like to design fashion. Manufacturing is predominantly overseas, but there's a lot of people who actually want to work in styling. Stitch Fix is effectively a website where you put your details in, what kind of fashion interests you have, and then a stylist will come up with a package of clothes specifically for you. They'll post it to your house. You can wear it and you can send it back. If you send it back, there's no additional charge beyond your monthly fee. It's really kind of turning retail on its head. There's a trend nowadays away from consumerism and environmental wastage, which is what fast fashion is often associated with. So in this way, it's more of a sharing type scenario. It also taps into trends for young people being time poor, maybe a bit lazy because they get a parcel of clothes that arrive. It helps with that sort of Instagram generation where people want to look great in photos and they probably don't want to be seen in stuff twice. Stitch Fix is quite a young company. They listed on the NASDAQ in America in 2017. They're now valued at $3 billion and they entered Australia recently. We've also seen a number of Australian startups coming to match it. I understand this industry is quite different to most of the organisations on this phone call, but really what I wanted to talk about is the fashion retailers are thinking about themselves as we buy clothes, we put them in store, we pay for expensive fit outs, we have people there, and they think that's what their business is. But actually, if you think about your consumer and what are they really trying to achieve with your services, that might help you figure out better ways of transforming the industry. It is, however, quite difficult to go and disrupt the whole industry. So I've got two little quick wins to finish out my presentation, and these are more easily achieved by organisations. The first one is user experience or UX. It's definitely a buzzword right now, and it's been a buzzword for about last year. We constantly come in contact with digital platforms where internal stakeholders have basically built something that works for them, and they haven't really thought about the user. If you get some qualified user experience designers involved, the trend or the buzzword is human-centered design. What do the humans at the other end want? How are they interacting with it? What are they looking for? If you do a UX review of your digital assets, you'll usually find ways to improve things quite dramatically. So we've helped, for example, a not-for-profit dramatically increase the donations they get online. That's not the primary source of revenue for their organisation, so to some degree it was a bit of an afterthought, but we were able to make that process really smooth, and it had a sort of exponential increase in usage, very much a quick win. So if it's been a long time since you've actually engaged some users to look at your platform, UX design could be a real quick win for your organisation, especially if people maybe find you online or check out your services online. There could be some real easy quick wins there. Oh, I've got another slide there. So this is kind of going down into the detail about how UX works. You kind of think through your personas. So in the disability sector, it can be the person you deliver your services to, or it could be a carer or a family member. And then they would all interact with your digital services in a different way. What are they looking for? How can you provide a solution that works for them? The next thing I want to talk about is chatbots. Chatbots are really sort of becoming quite pervasive now. If you see the example on the screen, this one is driven by a chatbot. So it's kind of programmed to take the user down journeys to identify what they're after and effectively push them towards particular areas of the website. And in some cases, it might actually be push them to the phone number to talk to your call center, or maybe it's to provide their details so that your team can call them back. What's good about this is that it's quite easy for users on a mobile phone or their home, and it's quite cheap actually. It can give people a much better experience. I've come to the end of my slides. Does anyone have any questions?
John, we haven't got any more questions, but I will just let everybody know, if you do have more questions and you've forgotten to ask one, just feel free to email it through to info@ndp.org.au. All right, thank you everybody, and thank you very much, John.
Thanks everyone.